So the biggest challenge that I find in running an assault-based army in Warhammer 40,000, and we looked about this in last week's podcast, thoughts, reflections on running a Core Knight-based Chaos Space Marine army, this idea of a template, different waves moving forward. And I was providing the analysis based on my Berserkers of Scalathrax army. But that is the reflection, the template. Certainly the idea was, in the previous podcast, to get you, if you're interested in running an assault-themed army, or I should say a big component of your army having that assault feel, some of the things that you need to keep in mind, the questions that you need to answer through model count, through what you want to play, through army faction to make this work. And that's up in my YouTube channel here in the Warhammer 40K playlist, and the link underneath this video to kind of pump you back to my blog where we discuss more about that if you're coming in on this podcast through Google search or recommended videos. So I outlined this idea of wave theory, I outlined some of the questions, and I wanted to circle back around and kind of prioritize the number one answer that you need to have in 40K. And in list building, when I kind of define answer, what that means is either a direct solution. So if you have a powerful unit, what is my solution to stopping it? Well, it's 40K, just throw enough dice at something and it vanishes. But if I'm not able to do that, because this is a duality, and there's lots of great ways to explore and play 40K, for myself, I want to have fun playing the army that I want to play. This is just my personal take on it. I read the Black Library books, I collect the models, I read the narrative. Part of it is my role-playing background. I see myself on the table. I want to be part of that history on the table. I want to be there storming the walls of Holy Terra. I mean, that's kind of the one-to-one. That's the narrative I'm looking to play. So in a lot of my army lists, if we just go based on the meta, just on the rules, based on what Games Workshop is pushing out there in the moment, augmented by the rules of 40K, what they want to sell in each edition, I don't always play the most optimal units. So if I can't do that, the second question is, if I can't stop you by rolling enough dice and making you disappear, how can I keep your army busy? And again, what units do you have? What book are you playing? What army faction? How can I keep you busy, my opponent, so that you want to destroy my army, or you realize this is the weak unit and you want to take it out, but your forces are elsewhere on the table? So this is kind of that entry point, that starting point. The number one challenge with running an assault-based army is that the scale is all wrong, and it's not a criticism. The scale is completely off and all wrong for the current incarnation of Warhammer 40,000 with what's on the table. So we're going to go back a little bit of time, and it's always interesting to read the previous books and how they presented 40K and the missions and the units. And I'm going back to the 3rd edition 40K book, that kind of classic book with the Black Templars on there. Not that I promote piracy or condone piracy, but I'm sure somewhere out there is a PDF. And what's interesting is there's an example of a 1,500 point Black Templar army. And at the time, Games Workshop tournaments, the standard level of play was 1,500 points. So as a collector, you wanted to try and get your army, not that you couldn't play smaller games or larger games or that we played different point games. Remember, at the time, 750 was considered a starting point. But the idea was if you got your army up to 1,500 points, you could bring it to events, you could bring it to tournaments. That was kind of the standard on there. You look at this army compared to now, armies that are out there at a similar power level now, and a 3rd edition 1,500 point army looks like you're playing Kill Team because the point value of the models were so high. Now, over time, Games Workshop realized, well, we want to get more stuff on the table, physical model mass. I want to get more Marines on the table. I want to get more vehicles on the table. I want to get more plastic kits on the table. I want to get more Finecast out there. So the point cost of units as a whole, especially if they're power armor Marines, has been decreasing. The games have been getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So that's kind of the first effect coming at us. Second, I'm a little bit guilty at this. I like big games. I like playing more models on here. But the level of play in terms of what the community is bringing, the overall meta, favors bigger games, favors more models, favors higher values. So not only are units decreasing, but players are shoveling out more and more stuff on the table. The size of the gaming table, the physical size of the gaming table. Can play on big tables, can play on small tables. I remember one game playing my Eldar, my Samhan Warhost, a very memorable game. I'm not really sure why. I might have just moved in, but we were playing the game on my living room floor. And it was interesting to kind of zoom around the furniture and kind of just play everything out there and do our best not to step on any models in the process. And while there is no definitive gaming table, the standard for Warhammer is more or less that defined wargaming table size. We'll add to the fact that 8th edition increases the shooting ability. Add to the fact that range has increased across the scope of weapons. You can see where I'm going. There's more stuff, and it can shoot you a lot more. Turn 1, your opponent, even if they're not like super shooty guard or Tau, is going to have weapons in range. Some weapons are in range. 15, 20%, 1/3, whatever the point of the army is going to be, they're going to be in range against you. Turn 2, everything is going to be in range midfield with them pushing forward. So right away, you have to have some way to reduce that firepower, to bring that dice level down on there, because turn 1, your opponent is going to start removing critical mass, model mass. And I define that, again, we go into more detail in the previous podcast in the archives, but critical model mass means if I lay out my army and I have enough dice, I have enough Cornate dice to do this. If I put down dice in the assault, what each unit can generate, that's its maximum dice potential. That's all the dice I have for the entire game. As I take losses every turn, physical model losses, I pull dice off from that. When I finally make it across the table for that glory, I need to have enough dice to be able to hit, to be able to wound, to be able to cause U-model losses, to survive potentially the next round, to survive a round of shooting after that, after I disengage. All those variable factors. Turn 1, if I'm eating everything on the table from shooting, I'm not going to have enough critical mass. So as a close combat army, as a close combat enthusiast, I need to be able to make sure turn 1, how do I suppress your shooting? And a couple of ways to do that. Of course, we're going to utilize terrain. Absolutely. And in 40K, terrain is an important aspect of the game. And many of us do not play with the correct amount of terrain on there. But terrain is a bonus. Certainly we shouldn't count on terrain helping our army on there. We want to utilize the tactics that we have, the tactical advantages that it offers, but I like to build an army based on no terrain on the table. That kind of analogy there. So I'm not stuck into like I need that line of sight blocking piece on there. We negate shooting 3 ways. Deployment lockdown. Get something into your opponent's deployment zone as quick as possible. Turn 1, the gaming table divided up into those 3 bands, where you deploy as your deployment zone, where I deploy as my deployment zone, and then we have that mid band on there. Turn 1, what can I be? How can I be? What can I have in your deployment zone? So you're busy dealing with it. We see this as this wave 1 concept, very important. Turn 2, can I flood the table with trash mobs? Games Workshop loves that. They love cultists on there, or zombies or whatever you're going to throw down on there, gaunts. Can you flood the table so that your opponent's high value or mid value shooting dice, not all shooting dice are created equally, right? Bunch of flashlights at strength 3, bunch of bolters strength 4, bunch of shuriken everything strength 6 or higher. When you're shooting at a certain power level of 4, 5, or 6 strength or beyond, when you're shooting at toughness 3, unless they're space elves because they're very pricey, and they cry the tears of Ishtar there. If you're just a toughness 3 cultist or guardsman, I want to eat all those shots. I want to eat all those high value dice shots that you're throwing down, because my model mass is going to outstrip what you can pump out. Not forever, only a turn, maybe a turn and a half, depends on how the dice gods look at us here. But with that, can I put enough of a mass trash mob or wasteoids kind of pushing forward? Third piece, do I have everything on the table? Sometimes that's the best way, not to be there at all. But tactically, that plays into other aspects of your army. And then, of course, we get into codex or army-specific shenanigans where you're using psychics to boost things, or you're bringing in Forge World, or you're bringing in stuff that is unique and outside of the scope. Like, here's my 3 Primarchs, or whatever it's going to be that you're going to use physically to, like, clobber your opponent and soak up all that damage. We used to call those Death Stars. I mean, they still exist in 40K. But I believe the Death Star has changed in its scope and not only composition, but also what it can potentially deal with on there. So I wanted to push this up because that, for me, running an assault-based army, if I had to prioritize it, and I wanted to swing back around in the comments and address that by posting this, that's, for me, that's the starting place where we want to look at and where we want to be.